I never, ever, ever woke up in the morning and thought, I think I'll run a women's network, ever. I mean, it was just never on my plan. I never wanted to be any kind of leader. I wanted to be a vet, actually, at one point. But many things have happened in my life, and I think I've just been following the path in some ways that has been presented to me, but then probably carving my own journey through that path as well. But some of you, most of you, I think, maybe a few of you that are very close to me know little snippets of my story, but most of you don't know my story. But my mum was actually a domestic worker that went from the Philippines, a really small town in the Philippines, in the 1970s. She was one of the very first sort of exports of the Philippines in the domestic trade. And she was only elementary school educated, and she came from such a small town that when she went to England, she didn't even know that England was not America. It was only after she'd already arrived and started working there that she finally figured out that there was a different place abroad other than the US, and she wasn't in the US at all. So, you know, it was a real big step for her, because people just didn't do that then. People didn't just get on planes and leave their family and go abroad. And you know, there was this first batch of really courageous people that did it, and my mum was one of them. And you know, she did it because she wanted to create more for herself. But even though she was a maid, effectively, I believe she was an entrepreneur. It's an entrepreneurial thing to do, right? They have to get all the money together, convince people to give them the money to book the flight to go out, and, you know, go through agencies and all these things that you would never have done if you come from a tiny, tiny town. So my mum did that, and as a result, met my dad in the UK. My dad was a mechanic. He was a son of European refugees, and he was born in the UK. And so met my dad, and they were married there. And after they were married and my mum was pregnant with me and she was about to have me, she said to my dad, who'd never been, he traveled around Europe, he'd never been to Asia, said to my dad, you should come with me to the Philippines because I want to go back there and have my child with my family. And he said, great, what's it like in the Philippines? And she said, it's like Hawaii. Palm trees, beaches, it's just like Hawaii. So my poor dad goes back to my mum's tiny town where they have nothing, no beach, just dirt and chickens. And he was like, well, this isn't how I expected Hawaii to be. He'd also never been to Hawaii. And so he lived in this tiny town with my mum. He was like the only white guy in the whole vicinity of the, you know, of the city, and got quite well known for it, and then worked within this town and did farming, basically. So the plan, because there was an American air base there, my mum, after all this time, still hadn't figured out that America wasn't England, said, don't worry, you can get a job in the American air base. And then my dad got there, and they wouldn't employ him because he's not American. You needed a green card. So he ended up like riding a buffalo into the field with my uncle, and being a farmer and working in the field and living in my uncle's house. So they did that for about 6 months or so, until my dad realized that this was not going anywhere. I think one of the last straw was when he saw the hospital, because my mom was like, don't worry, we have hospitals. And my dad saw the hospital. He was like, we've got to go back to England. So they decided to go back to the UK. So I was 6 months old when I was back in the UK, and I grew up in the UK. And I had a really strange childhood because my parents were domestic staff, so they started living in for really wealthy families. And as an only child, I grew up in a lot of huge mansions. So, you know, the Lord and Lady Wolfston was one of the later employers of my parents. They owned Burberry's. And at the time when we first gone back, when I was growing up, they were actually, well, my dad was a mechanic. So initially when I was little, you know, they just worked, and they had like a little home, and he did his mobile mechanic work. And eventually they started moving into this kind of, it became a big thing to have like a live-in couple if you were wealthy. And so my dad used to drive and maintain the cars, and my mum would housekeep. And so what happened was I grew up from around about, I think probably 6 years old onwards, living in these huge mansions. And I would just kind of like follow my mum around. And Amanda has a really weird similar story, even though we're actually not related through my mum, through our mums, we're related through our dads. But that's another story. So I grew up in this strange place where I used to follow my mum around, look and sit in these mansions. And one of the really significant times in my life was when I was, my parents worked for this Nigerian self-made millionaire, and he was a really incredible, dynamic guy. And I would just follow him around, watching him, because his father was a tailor, and he made millions from importing buttons into Nigeria from Italy, and then became a serial entrepreneur and had every kind of business that you could possibly think of. He was doing shoes, thermostats. He was doing plates, like anything that he could think of that he could replicate in Nigeria, he was doing. And I would just follow this guy around, and he'd be shouting on the phone. And sometimes he'd see me, and he'd like hand me like a big bag of money, and he'd ask me to count the money. And I'd like sit counting the money for hours. And then if I got the amount right, he'd give me like, they were like £50 notes, he'd give me like £50. So I have like, you know, your experiences kind of build your relationship with different things, right? So I have a real mixed relationship with money and entrepreneurship, because on one hand I can see the power of entrepreneurship and money, but on the other hand I also saw how it didn't make any difference when things mattered. But anyway, I was kind of bored because I was about 9 years old, so I went to local schools, you know, state schools in the UK, quite insignificant time, and then eventually I met a friend who was one of these rich kids from one of these other houses, and we used to play in the garden, and she went to boarding school. And I used to like to read because I didn't have any friends, because we were in mansion, right? There was no kids there apart from the one that used to turn up every now and then from boarding school. And I used to read the Enid Blyton books, you know, about boarding school and everything, St. Clair's. I loved it. And I thought to myself, that would be a really good thing to do. So I basically pitched to my parents that I wanted to go to boarding school. I didn't really understand the cost, but I was like, yeah, I'd really like to go to boarding school. Plus, I'm kind of knocking around quite a bit on my own. I have no friends. So my parents sent me to one of the best boarding schools in the country with support from their employer. So I went to Battle Abbey, which is like one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the UK. And so here I am, a daughter of a maid, and I'm among all of these, you know, really wealthy people. But the interesting thing is like, regardless of all these different things, I always managed to fit in somehow. I never really felt like an outsider. I didn't really experience feeling that I didn't belong or anything like that, or not that I could really ever think of. And then the time started changing, and there was a big recession hitting in the UK, and things were getting hard, and things were getting more and more stressful for my parents. So being kind of entrepreneurs that I believe they are, they'd come up with an idea that we would go back to the Philippines again. And they had this really good plan this time. They were going to import a tractor to the Philippines, and then they would rent the tractor out all over the towns because they only had buffalo. And it made so much sense, because my dad was a mechanic, he could maintain the tractor, it was agricultural, it was pretty much the only thing that you could do there. So we sold up everything, and we moved and went to buy a tractor, but we couldn't afford the tractor because they missed a bit, which is the cost of import, and also some of the red tape of importing things. So in the end, we end up again in the Philippines with like no tractor, no business. So what do you do when you come from a rural town? You start a pig farm. So my parents started a pig farm. I mean, they'd never pig farmed before. So my dad was going around all the different farms, learning about pig farming. He would go to the UK, go to all the UK pig farms, study how they farm pigs in the UK, and bring this kind of like pig farming concept back to the Philippines. So it was like the best, it was like the most modern pig farm you've ever seen in the Philippines. People used to come from all over the Philippines to like look at this pig farm and learn the techniques. And we had like methane, we were capturing methane gas, and I mean, I look back and I'm like, wow, my parents were really cool. They were doing really cool things. At the time I was just climbing trees and stuff. But again, I managed to fit in, you know, I went from this tiny little boarding school, I went to like a huge local Filipino school, and it was so confusing because it was huge culture shock. I mean, you know, wooden desks, like the original, no, not even a wooden desk, like just a desk like that where you just sit with your thing, and like no air conditioning or anything like that. And even though a lot of the curriculum is in English, it was still very not English. So I went through that as well, so that was really interesting. And then, and I got really involved in the farm. I loved the farm. I loved the fact that, I loved the whole operation of the business. I was from about 14, 15, I was like, as soon as I get home from school, I'd be in the farm and I'd follow the vet around, and so I decided that I wanted to become a vet, and I was literally doing a lot of like unqualified vet things. Normally when there's like more men in the room, I'm like, and I used to castrate piglets and all the men go. But it's not, it only has the effect if I talk about them. So yeah, and I really enjoyed it, and everything was going great, and then all of a sudden a volcano, Mount Pinatubo, erupted, and it erupted about, I think about 11 miles from my house. So, and my parents were back in the UK at the time because we needed some capital into the business to grow. So they'd gone back to work to send money in, and literally, because I just found a picture of it the other day. I wasn't sure if my memory had exaggerated what had happened, because it was a long time ago, or if it was exactly like that. And I found pictures, and it flattened like a house of cards, our business. So there's literally a picture of just some rubble and the roof of the business, and it flattened everything. And so I spent most of my sort of 16 years, or age of 16, trying to figure out, because my parents were in the UK and communication wasn't like it was then. And I was still going to school, and the crazy thing is like, I don't know if any of you remember, but the problem with this volcanic eruption, it wasn't lava, it was like mud. So there was a huge river, which was between where my mom's town was and the main city. And every time it rained in the mountains, the mud would come down the mountain like a giant like tidal wave of mud, and it was huge. I mean, the river is now probably from here to the other side of the road, like where that building is. It just kept carving itself out. And I used to cross that river every day in my Jeep. I used to drive to go to school. And as long as and there'd be like a series of men with flags like up the river, and you would just kind of look up the river, and as long as no one was waving anything, it was okay. But sometimes you'd be halfway across the river and you'd see the guy waving, and you just kind of put the foot down because you'd had to get across before the lahar came down, and it was fast. And then it became too dangerous because quite a lot of cars got swept away. So we had to cross in the bucket of a payloader, you know, like the big digger. So the jeepney would drop you to the side of the river, and then you would literally get into the bucket of the payloader, and it would lift you, and then the payloader would, and you'd kind of hold on in your uniform, and then you get to the other side of the river, and it would put you back down, and you take another jeep and go to school. And I did that twice a day. And so that was my life, which at the time wasn't really unconventional, because it was what was happening, you know, around, like things like your life is just your life, isn't it? Until you look back and you're like, wow, it's kind of crazy that I did that. So that was one thing. And then eventually we decided, my parents were like, look, this is not going to work. We need to fold the business. You need to come back to England. And I was like, okay, no. I had nothing there. I knew nobody. I'd been pig farming. I was 16. I dropped out of school. I had no good reason to go back to England. So I just ran away. That was my good excuse. I ran away for a year and basically lived quite rough. I lived more or less in slums for like what we called housing, like just like small housing. You guys would call slums because it was just corrugated iron and like wooden beds and stuff. So I did that for a year until such time that I literally had no more money. Like I'd sold everything I had. I didn't know how to earn, and I had nothing. And I was literally starving. I was like 5 stone when I went back to England. But you know what? When I had no money, I had this lady who used to rent out the boarding house, and I called her Nanay, which means mother in Filipino. And she taught me how to, because it was like pump water and like cook food on the stove with wood and cook rice and just eat rice and like fish. And we had this, the one thing that I could tolerate all of it, but one thing that I hated the most about that was we had this outside bathroom, which was just blocks with a metal roof and a hose pipe poking through between the blocks and the roof. And it was locked up at night. And if you wanted to go to the bathroom at night, you had to go to the lady, in case somebody wanted to use the bathroom against your permission. So I'd go get the padlock, go into the bathroom, and it had like one bulb, a toilet seat, the hose coming through, and I used to go to the bathroom like this because the walls were covered in cockroaches. As soon as it went dark, they would be all over the walls. It was horrible. It was really, really rough. So anyway, eventually I literally had no more choice, and so I phoned my parents, and of course my parents, they knew that I was around, but they didn't know what to do. They couldn't get me to come back, so I said, I'm coming home. So they sent me a ticket, and I'm sitting on the plane now, and I had to go buy clothes and stuff, you know, I had like no proper clothes or anything. I'm sitting on the plane and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life? I have nothing. I have no education. I have no knowledge of anything. I actually don't know what I'm going to do with myself, and I was so miserable. And then I was looking around the plane and I saw the stewardess, and I thought, oh, I'll be a stewardess. That's what I'll do. So that was my plan. I formulated the plan on the flight and got back to England and got busy with the stewardess job hunting. So I applied for BA, and I was too young by a year, and so I got a job in a currency exchange. And during this time I was studying what are the criteria to get hired by BA, because I knew I probably wasn't on paper a good candidate, but they didn't actually need a degree or anything. They just needed customer service experience, blah, blah, blah. So I worked in one of those goldfish bowl currency exchanges in the station for a year, and it was like the worst money in the world, the longest hours. It was like ridiculous shifts, 6 a.m. till 11 p.m. I used to do double shifts every single day, and just sitting there and while I was sat there, I learned Japanese because I was like, I need a language for BA. That was the one thing that I needed, and they didn't accept my mum's dialect, which is the only thing that I'd learned. So I learned Japanese so that I could go through this test. So I applied for BA, and it was brilliant because I was sitting during the interview, and at one point they went, so tell me, have you had any experience of dealing with an emergency? And I went, yes I have. Got blown up by a volcano. And they were like, so it was like 3 people interviewing me, and I told them all about what I did and what I had to do. And I actually got separated from my family and evacuated on a truck. And I ended up in an evacuation center in Manila for like 3 days or something with like a whole bunch of random strangers with my one cousin. And then when we went back, we heard that my mom's town was destroyed because a lot of it was covered in mud. And so me and my cousin they dropped us back in the truck to the nearest town, but my mom's town is remote, so we had to walk for about probably like a full day. And we were just walking, if anyone knows what it's like when you see snow in the morning and the snow is just like completely untouched. And so we walked for miles and miles and miles through this untouched ash from the volcano with nobody because everyone had evacuated. And as we walked up to my mom's town, it was like ghost town, ghost town, ghost town. And then all of a sudden I come near and I can hear my auntie shouting for her kids. And I opened the gates to where my auntie was, where I lived. And it was exactly the same as, they were shoveling the sand and everything off the roof and trying to pick up all the rubble, but none of them had left because they didn't know where we were and we couldn't communicate, so they just waited for us. So it was a really incredible experience. But how do you connect all of these crazy dots, right? And then I go back to England and I work for BA for 10 years, then I meet my husband who's in IT, and we start doing IT together, selling laptops on eBay. And you just kind of get into patterns of your life that unravel for you. After I met Bobby and he was working for a company and I was flying, and then I was pregnant with my second son, and I was like, how are we going to make some money? We actually went through just a phase of like selling things online and buying things online, doing all sorts of different things, and I ended up in IT. So from this eBay shop that we started with, I actually ended up with an IT company where our clients were investment banks. So I would go in and sit with investment bankers and talk to them about servers and IT. I didn't even have a computer until I met Bobby. I bought my computer from him because he was friends with my dad. It's another story. So, all of these different things, but when you look back on your life, so one of the things that we talked about, Amanda mentioned several times, was the theme. It's like, my life is really strange, right? It's had lots of different weird themes, but if you look across it, community has always been part of it, and entrepreneurship has always been part of it. Entrepreneurship is a way to survive. It means so much more to me than just, earning money and starting business. It means that if you know how to make money, you can always survive. Even if you have nothing, you can find a way to earn and feed yourself. And community have always supported me. Even when I've had nothing, I've had people that would give me food or give me a shelter or take care of me or help me out with something. So those things, they go deep for me. It's not just about, creating events and everything else. And technology, as Amanda said, it's a means to connect it all, isn't it? If you can take technology and amplify community and entrepreneurship, you're amplifying out everything, in a way that you can actually impact more people. Which kind of brings me to my announcement. So for those of you who were here last month, I talked about how I was noticing that there were a lot of women's events cropping up and a lot of women's communities cropping up. And I felt a little bit of pressure around the competition at one point. And then I said to Bobby that, if I'm worried that other people are doing something that I do in a better way or in a bigger way, then I'm not thinking big enough. And I had this on my mind anyway, but I kind of inspired my own self. Is that even allowed? From what I was saying. And I thought, I'm really not thinking big enough. I need to think bigger. I love technology, I love community, I love entrepreneurship. How do I impact more people? Because I love what we've done here, but it just doesn't feel like enough. I need to do more. Anyway, I've been sitting on this idea for a while. It was something that I was planning to do in my retirement because it's quite big, which is to go to the Philippines and help get more women trained in skills that they need to become entrepreneurs. So learning things like digital marketing skills and social media, because most of you guys really need these services and you don't have it, you don't have access to it. And I have a team of 8 that sit behind Executive Lifestyle that are all in the Philippines in remote places, and they do my editing, my communicating with you guys, just running the platform basically so that I can do other things. And a lot of ladies in the community have asked me, can you help me hire a VA in the Philippines? I really need some help with the admin assistant. I need something. And I've hesitated because it's a little bit complicated, because they come from remote towns and there's a bit of a cultural gap and there might be a training gap. And so I said to Amanda, one day I'm going to go to the Philippines and I'm going to build training centers for women in towns so that they can skill themselves up with the type of things that we need as small business owners. And I've been thinking about it more and more and more, and suddenly I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I reached out to a couple of partners. One of my really strong partners is Microsoft, because I've worked with them over here. And I said, look, I want to bring connectivity to 100,000 women in the Philippines. Will you work with me? And immediately, within 20 minutes, the managing director said, what do you need? And this all happened like since last month when I said the thing about thinking bigger. So it's all happening ahead of time, but I'm actually going to spend a lot of time for the rest of this year planning out an event, starting with an event called Connected Women, which we ran here, but we'll run it slightly differently there, to spread the word about this. But the real mission is, of course, to build the community and provide the training, but the real mission is to provide the connectivity, because most of them can't connect, you see. They can't get work and they can't connect. So I don't know if anyone received the email from my VA, Moren. She's the one who emails you about everything. So she lives in my mom's town. And I hired her 2 years ago, and she was looking after her brother's children. She didn't have anything. She didn't have any education or any kind of means to work. She studied IT in the Philippines, which is basically like keying in data. But it was costing her more money to travel to the call center than she was earning. So it wasn't even worth her working. And then to earn more, she had to work like night shift in a factory, which is really dangerous. And the brothers were like, no. So her brother, who drives a tricycle, hired her to look after his kids. And I said to her 2 years ago, do you want to key in some business cards for me, because I have a lot? And so she was doing that, and now she runs the whole, pretty much the back end of the Athena Network for me. So I just thought, if we could give connectivity to more women like that. And actually the crazy thing is what is the thing that we all complain about the most? We have no time, right? We have no time. We want to grow bigger and create more impact and do more, but we have no time. And what do they have? They have like abundance of time. They're sat with time on their hands and nothing, no purpose. So I thought, if I could leverage the connectivity so that we can actually make use of their huge time resource and actually create this collaboration between micro businesses and entrepreneurs and small businesses that need the resource, and actually empower them. It's only basic skills, right? MailChimp, Eventbrite, all the rest of it. They can learn it online. Then we can actually create more. And I have 8 people in my team, which I couldn't really afford on the ground. But 8 people on my team means I can do a hell of a lot more than doing it on my own. And so my challenge to you today, the challenge that I challenge myself about, is that think bigger. Because think about your theme and think about your purpose. I've thought about my purpose, and I want to take that purpose and I want to make more impact and help more people benefit from that. So think about whatever your goal was. My goal was like 2,000 women in the community in Singapore. You know, take your goal, take your impact goal, multiply it by 5, and then times it by 10. That's how I came up with 100,000. No, actually, I pulled the figure from thin air, actually. I was like, 100,000 seems doable. And then I broke it down. Okay, 10 towns, 10,000 women should be doable. It's a huge population, right? If I can give them free connectivity to partners, I mean, wouldn't you sign up? And I'm terrified because I have no idea how I'm going to do it. So Microsoft replied, they were like, what do you need? And I was like, let me get back to you. I'm still in the planning stages, but actually this is all I've got. I've only got the dream and the idea to do it, and the faith that somehow we can make it happen. But I need all of you guys as well. You know, I need all of you as well. So I hope that, you know, in the coming 2016, you know, you will support me by keeping the Athena Network running. I will still be coming back. I'm just going to have to spend a lot of time there. But I will be coming, like, you know, every month for a couple of events. But I need to focus on the bigger impact there so that I can also bring the impact back here. So, you know, please keep it running and keep it amazing and beautiful, and just ignore me as I loiter in the background with my wine or my beer, so that we can all do more together. And that's my wish from all of you today, for my birthday. Thank you.